Percy Jackson and the Olympians has become quite the spark of the water cooler for Disney Plus as of late, winning audiences over with its rich character development, clever integration of the Greek mythos into our modern-day society, and extremely well-paced and cleverly episodic plot, hurtling over the onslaught of mediocrity we've been getting from the service since a mere few months into its launch that's even managed to ruin the series that was essentially the foundation of its successful launch. Percy Jackson, along with a few other recent Disney Plus seasons, has managed to bring the service to new heights that people were beginning to think weren't possible for the service or the franchise. But what is making the show so popular? Why are people drowning themselves in tears over the finale's twist and begging producers for a season 2 of the show? Is it the fact that the plot is more spread out and able to breathe? Something that I've appreciated about most recent book-to-show adaptations over their film counterparts? That's definitely helped, to a point where I almost want Warner Brothers to move forward with that rumored Harry Potter series that they were supposedly considering. Is it the integration of Greek mythos into our modern times, especially on the budget that the show probably had to work with? Perhaps, although I could see some viewers expecting something more extravagant, especially competing against, again, Harry Potter. Is it the characters and how rich they are in development, as well as how charming they are in personality? We're getting warmer to my bigger point here, and again, the pacing of the plot definitely helps with their development. All these elements make for a great show, but there have been plenty of great movies and shows that have been dismissed by audiences, as well as plenty of terrible movies and shows that have continued to rack in the viewership. No, the biggest reason why Percy Jackson has won over audiences goes back to the roots of the franchise that this franchise is trying to replicate the success of Harry Potter. While the fantasy elements played a big part in its success, the biggest thing that most audiences love about the Harry Potter legacy is that it was a legacy, growing up with its audience and maturing along with its characters. And the first step of that journey was putting kids, younger kids, at the core of its initial fantasy adventure. It was lighthearted so as to be accessible for modern audiences, as well as just the right amount of dark to rope in more mature audiences, even if not as vastly, which would be superb preparation for them as the films grew up along with its initially younger audience, becoming darker and more brutal as the characters grew older and started getting more and more integrated into a world of pain, misery, and no other way to put it, death. Something that stories like The Hunger Games and Maze Runner had to kick off with and thus put more matured leads in at the starting point. This is something that the Percy Jackson movies got horribly wrong. The quests they go on in the movies are along the silly, fantasy-centric lines of Sorcerer's Stone, but the characters are established as high school students, which rivals High School Musical in terms of silliness and cheesiness. It basically tried to set kids that were clearly 17 on a 12-year-old's fantasy adventure, which was a complete mismatch in terms of tone, which made for an increasingly awkward experience. But okay, the show makes the kids the appropriate age, it's better matched from the tone, and from what I've gathered as someone who hasn't read the books, it's more accurate to the books. That's all fine and good, but these writers and producers have unlocked another secret that I don't recall any TV or movie fantasy series tackling before. In Harry Potter, for instance, as rebellious and adventurous as the kids were in spite of it, there was a severe amount of restriction on the part of the teachers and prefects that reminded them that, yes, they were younger kids in a world in danger alongside magic, and nobody wanted them to be a part of it. I guess this was something that the Percy Jackson movies were trying to get around, with the story basically asking them to travel to Vegas and Los Angeles on their own, although again, I haven't read the books, so I don't know all the details, but either way, the world of today has evolved beyond that and has, or at least should have, less restraint on children, as a good chunk of adults believe, as they should, that they can learn about the world by better experiencing it for themselves, and most kids are appreciative of that continuing sense of freedom and independence. In a subtle way that I had to write this video just to think about, the Percy Jackson series acknowledges that. In Harry Potter, the kids couldn't even go down the hall without being told, "Get back to your class!" But in Percy Jackson, the kids are allowed to wander through a Vegas casino without being scolded or arrested. The adults are just like, "Take this bus ticket and go across the country," without even a hint of a phase. That should be out of place, but in today's day and age, it actually kind of makes perfect sense. I mean, okay, if they were 7 or something, it'd probably be weird, but these 12-year-olds are simultaneously aware of the dangers that are out there and treated with enough maturity and independence to be trusted with this dangerous quest that could make or break the world as we know it. Again, as proven by the Hunger Games or the later Harry Potter entries, the world is only going to get darker as they grow older, so it's best to put lighter fantasy struggles in front of them now while they can handle it. And the fact that the show doesn't hold back on doing this is something that the audiences have grown to appreciate, as it treats the younger audiences like adults and not just children. To put it simply, by staying true to the source material, Percy Jackson has managed to connect with audiences better than if it had taken any safer route. By setting kids at this age on this fantasy quest with no restraints and a sense of independence, it took the biggest thing that audiences love about its competing franchise and evolved it, treating even younger audiences even more so like the grown-ups they're becoming at this earlier age. It may seem like a small difference from the movies, but it makes for a more even tone as well as a much more compelling story. And if there's one thing that writers and producers could take away from that, it's to consider when making an adaptation that the source material is the way that it is for a reason. Because in this case, the age of the kids ended up making the biggest difference for me, as well as, from what I've gathered, many viewers. Kids are growing growing up faster now than they ever have before, as they have quicker access to information than they ever have before, and are continuing to evolve and grow smarter and quicker. And continuing to treat them like children in spite of that fact won't result in their control and obedience, but rather, in the long run, the opposite of that. And shows like Percy Jackson understand that. They connect with audiences better because they treat their audiences like people rather than just, kids. And they'll be appreciated for that well into their adulthood, the same way that the shows my generation started off on are appreciated now. Percy Jackson is one of the few shows I can think of that understands its audience to a T and treats them with dignity and maturity, which is such a win for the Disney Plus brand that I often have to remind myself that it's the same service to put out this crap. And for that reason, alongside just being a great show with fun characters, a compelling story, sad moments, triumphant moments, and clever twists on the Greek mythos, it will go down in history as a great show for ages to come.